Taxation without representation is tyranny. This was the rallying cry of our founding fathers. This was the rallying cry of American patriots in the years leading up to the American Revolution. It was the rallying cry of militiamen at the battles of Lexington and Concord, and it still should be the rallying cry of Congress. No taxation without representation is embedded in our Constitution. The Constitution forbids any one man or woman from raising taxes. Revenue is not only a question for Congress, but the Constitution commands that taxation legislation originate in the House of Representatives. This is the only issue that specifically has to originate not only in Congress, but in one specific house. Our founders thought that the House of Representatives, elected every 2 years, were closer to the people. And the things they feared the most were big taxes and big government. They said taxes must originate in the House. And yet these taxes are originating with the White House. The idea that no one should have taxes imposed on them without their consent is central to the ancient concept of what constitutes a free people. That principle is enshrined in Magna Carta, that taxation should be imposed only after obtaining the common counsel of the kingdom. It was reaffirmed in the 1689 English Bill of Rights when it declared that there shall be no taxation without the consent of Parliament. In 1765, the American patriot who helped formulate the grievances against the British Crown, James Otis, called for a defense of this principle by popularizing the phrase, taxation without representation is tyranny. This principle was said by many to be the principle, the spark that sparked our revolution. Yet today the Senate is compelled to act because one person in our country wishes to raise taxes. Without the approval of the Senate, without the approval of the House, without the approval of the Constitution. The idea that one person can raise taxes is contrary to our founding principles. The Constitution forbids it. As Montesquieu wrote, in the spirit of the laws, when the legislative and the executive are combined and united in one person, there can be no liberty. Our founders took that heart to lesson and embedded that in the Constitution, the principle of the separation of powers, as well as a system of checks and balances. They knew that combining the legislative and executive powers would lead the country down a path to tyranny. Allowing taxes to be levied, doubled, tripled, and then one day perhaps forgiven is a recipe for chaos. The tariffs are implemented, the tariffs are canceled, the tariffs are delayed, the tariff rate changes daily. Just this week, the President added a special 10% import tax on Canada because he was mad about the nation's Ronald Reagan ad. An ad, by the way, which was showing Ronald Reagan verbatim speaking. Newsflash to the administration, Reagan was a free trader. Reagan believed, and I quote, that protectionism costs consumers billions of dollars, damages the overall economy, and destroys jobs. Ronald Reagan's vision for America can be seen in our trading relationship with Canada. In 1986, President Reagan said, "Our trade policy rests firmly on the foundation of free and open markets." Further, he said, "I recognize the inescapable conclusion that all history has taught. The freer the flow of trade, the stronger the tides of human progress and peace among nations." It was Bastiat who wrote that when trade and when goods don't cross borders, armies will. It's not a guarantee of peace, but one way to achieve peace is to attempt to have good relations and trade with all nations. No country, no business, no family can plan a budget when the tax rates, the import tax rates, and the cost of every commodity are determined by the whims of one man. There are now tariffs on steel, there are tariffs on aluminum, there are tariffs on lumber, and they change from day to day. But not one of these tariffs was voted on by the people's elected representative in Congress. These tariffs are simply announced by presidential proclamation. So perhaps more fundamental than a debate over what these tariffs are, what the rates are, and what they do to our economy is the question of whether Americans ought to perpetually live under emergency rule.
When politicians talk about tariffs, it often sounds abstract, but tariffs affect something very real, the cost of everyday life. Today we're looking at Senator Rand Paul's criticism of tariff policy and why this debate matters for American families trying to manage rising costs. In this clip, from the Senate floor, Senator Rand Paul challenges tariff policies commonly associated with President Trump. His argument is simple. Tariffs are taxes on imports, and those costs are often passed on to American consumers. This reflects a long-running debate within the Republican Party about how best to support American industry. From a conservative standpoint, Paul's concern is about limited government and transparency. Traditional Republicans believe taxes should be clear and debated openly. Tariffs, however, raise costs without being labeled as taxes, giving Washington more control over prices while families quietly pay the difference.
This administration has declared emergencies with over 100 nations. With these emergency declarations, the president claims the unilateral right to levy import taxes. Think about this. What do you think of when you think of an emergency? You think of a war, a tornado, a famine. You don't think of trade policy that all of a sudden we have to give up on all of our constitutional prerogatives, all of the separation of powers, all that is embedded in the Constitution because there's an emergency in trade policy. If that were true, imagine what emergencies might come forward. Imagine where we would be and what lack of restraint would happen. And for Republicans, imagine what it's going to be like when someone from the other party is elected and they declare an emergency over the climate and ban cars or whatever might happen. We shouldn't be living this way. People say Congress is messy. Congress goes to gridlock. It's called debate. It's called discussion. And the only way we typically get somewhere is we have to agree with some people on the other side. That's one of the things we're trying to overcome now. But our founding fathers anticipated that a president might attempt someday to usurp the powers, the constitutional powers of the legislature. Madison wrote that our constitutional government would pit ambition against ambition. The ambition of a president or ambition of the Congress to usurp power will be checked by the other guarding their power. That we would limit the power of any one branch through checks and balances and prevent abuses of power. Madison, if he were here today, would be aghast to witness today's Congress that seems to lack any ambition to defend the constitutional separation of power. Emergency rule rejects the premise of a constitutional republic with limited powers and full accountability. Emergency rule is ruled by one person. We will perpetuate emergency rule that provides the president extraordinary powers to tax us without our consent. Is that what we're going to allow? Or will we restore constitutional government in which taxes are debated and voted on by the people's representatives? I, for one, still believe in the principle of no taxation without representation, and will vote to terminate this contrived emergency and end these unconstitutional import taxes.
Conservatives worry that hidden taxes hit responsible families hardest. Many Republicans support tariffs because they want to protect American jobs and reduce reliance on China. That concern is valid. The real question is whether tariffs achieve that goal without expanding government power or putting the financial burden on American families instead. This debate comes down to a core conservative question. Should Washington manage markets, or should free people make economic choices?